Finding the equation of a line that is perpendicular to x minus 3y equals 9 and passes through the point -3, -1. Okay, let's start first with the equation. We have x minus 3y equals 9. That's the equation we were given. Well, let's get rid of the x. We want to solve for y, that way it's in the form of y equals mx plus b. So that means we got to subtract, since it's a positive currently. Positive x, we subtract the x on both sides. Note, we can't combine the x with the 9, so we got to put an x to the 9. So it becomes -3y equals 9 minus x. But now we got to get rid of the 3, or -3, from the y. Since it's multiplying with the y, we're going to divide it. So divide by -3 on each term. Notice what we do to one side, we must do to the other side of the equal sign, but it's preferable to do individually to each term. So in other words, to the 9 and the -x as well. Notice that in this case, our x's, or pardon me, our -3's cancel out. And that leaves us with y equals, we have 9 divided by 3 gives us 3. Positive divided by a negative gives us a -3 then. And negative for that x over 3 gives us positive 1/3 x. Notice always when you have an x, there's one that's representative there. Okay, so let's rearrange them so it looks like it's in the form of y equals mx plus b. So all we've done is rearrange the 1/3 x to be at the beginning of the equation. So we have 1/3 x minus 3. And there we have our first equation, y equals 1/3 x minus 3. Intermediate step solution. Okay, second equation. So we're looking for an equation that is perpendicular. And it's a perpendicular to our previous line, the first equation. So perpendicular lines have reciprocal slopes. In other words, they're flipped. And also, perpendicular lines have opposite sign on the slope. So notice that our slope, m equals 3 over 1, because on our previous equation, we had our slope of 1/3. So we got to flip it. Instead of 1 over 3, it becomes 3 over 1. And notice that we also need opposite sign. So therefore, we need the slope to be negative. So our slope finally becomes minus 3 over 1. Keep in mind 3 over 1, or 3 divided by 1 is just, well, 3. So m equals -3 is the slope for our second equation. So let's plug it into our equation, y equals -3x plus b, or the form y equals mx plus b. So instead of the m, we replace the m value with the -3 we just found, which is the slope. Keep in mind that the equation must include the coordinate -3, -1. So -3 for the x, -1 for the y. So let's replace that in our previous formula. So now we have -1 equals -3 times -3 plus b. We replace the y and the x values. So -3 times -3, well, negative gives us a positive. 3 times 3 gives us 9. So we have -1 equals 9 plus b. And now let's get rid of the 9 to solve for the b. So it's a positive 9, so we've got to subtract it from both sides of the equal sign. Notice that the 9 minus 9 cancels out. And -1 minus 9 gives us -10. Do notice, we add the quantities, but they're both negative, so we borrow a total of $10. So hence we have to say it's a -10. And that's the v value. So let's plug it into our equation, y equals mx plus b. Notice that our slope, we found it to be -3, and our v value is -10. That looks kind of odd, having a positive and a negative. So we want to simplify completely. So positive times a negative will give us a negative. So our final formula, y equals -3x minus 10. And there is our final second equation. This is the one we needed. Let's try graphing, but let's figure out the slope. Our slope for the first equation, m equals 1/3, 1 over 3. Y-intercept for the first equation, notice it's the last value of our equation. 0 is always there, right? That's what makes it be the y-intercept. And then the y-intercept value, or the y value, -3 from our formula. Slope on the second equation. We have 3 over 1. We want to write it in the form of rise over run. This will help us to graph. So negative 3 over 1. Y-intercept, 0. Once again, it states that it's the y-intercept because there's a 0 for the x. And the negative 10, once again, comes from the v-value on our formula. So y-intercept 0, comma negative 10. Let's try plotting this. So let's not forget to label our x-axis and y-axis. Okay, and do notice, once again, we wanna plot the first dot, which is the y-intercept, 0, comma negative 3. Okay, so once we plot our y-intercept, keep in mind, we're gonna go up 1 and right 3. Okay, up 1 over 3, in other words, rise over run. Up 1 over 3, there's our next dot. Up 1 over 3, there's our next dot. And we can continue doing this. Up 1 over 3. Keep in mind, the light lines there are going to be erased. They're just so you can see where it goes up 1 over 3. And there are our dots. Okay, y-intercept for the second equation, 0, comma negative 10. But we have a slight issue. We cannot or will not be able to go down 3 over 1. Since as implied by our slope, it tells us to go down because it's a negative on the 3. So down 3 and to the right 1. But there's no space down below. So we've got to go in reverse. So instead of going down, we can also go reverse. We can say up and back. Notice that you can either go down or go back to get the equivalent of the negative sign. So in this case, we're going to go up and back to get to the equivalence. So up, in this case, 3 and back 1. Up, 3, back 1. Up, 3, back 1, etc. And there is our graph. Okay, so now let's trace the dots with the straight line. So there are 2 perpendicular lines. Sometimes it is defined by a right angle there in the center. We don't necessarily need a right angle, but we can tell that they're perpendicular to each other. Now, notice that our dot is checking. That way we can see that our coordinate, negative 3, comma negative 1, is corresponding to our line that we made for the second equation. Did you notice a mistake by any chance? No mistake? Well, keep in mind, do realize our labels for the x and y axis. Okay, on the x and y axis, the y axis at the very top has an x, so it should have been a y. And do notice that the y axis on the bottom, which should have been an x, has a y axis. Please correct them as needed. To remember, double check your answers, right? And don't forget, double check my answers as well.